back to Justice, a new podcast where I'll be covering the stories of true crime cases that have received justice and cases that are still seeking justice. I'm your host, Lindsay. Today, I will be covering the disappearance of Charlene Downes, who was reported missing from her hometown of Blackpool and was subsequently believed to have been murdered. Charlene Elizabeth Caroline Downes was born on the 25th of March 1989 to her parents Robert, known as Bob, and Karen Downes. She spent her early childhood living in Coventry with her two sisters, Emma and Rebecca, and later her younger brother Robert. Karen described Charlene on the TV show Crime Watch, saying, quote, "She loved music, she loved animals, and she loved her family, and she just loved life really." The family spent their holidays in Blackpool, which at the time was a very popular tourist and local destination for all ages. The Downes family began to experience financial difficulty when Bob Downes lost his job, resulting in them having to move from their home in a nice area to a council property in an area overrun by drug dealers, addicts and crime. During this time, social services were heavily involved with the Downes family. This was due to the company that Karen and Bob kept and the type of people that were given access to their 4 children. In 2011, several police reports and social services reports were leaked to the media via the Times newspaper. These reports detailed that the Downes children had been around sex offenders and abusers who were friends of Bob Downes for the majority of their young lives. From 1988 to 2003, the reports outlined 16 men who were sex offenders or criminals as having been present in the Downes family home and around the children, sometimes unsupervised. It is suspected that many of these men abused Charlene and her siblings during this time. Social services were on the brink of removing the 4 children from the home and placing them in the care of the state. However, in 1999, Karen and Bob decided to move everyone to Blackpool, away from the social services that had been so involved with their family. During the move, it seems that social services failed in their duty to protect the Downes children. There are no given reasons for this, but many speculate a lack of communication and funding for the services themselves meant that Karen and Bob seemed to be able to fly under the radar. They ultimately ended up keeping their 4 children, despite the documented proof that they were being raised in an unsafe environment. The family, now including Jessie, who is Karen's mother, moved into a property at 109 Buchanan Street in Blackpool together. Bob Downes once again very quickly made friends with a group of men who were sex offenders and abusers after meeting them drinking in the local bars and pubs. The social services once again became involved with the Downes family shortly after they arrived in Blackpool, but the children remained with their parents. The reports from around this time outline shocking details of the family's life. In March of 2000, Charlene's school became concerned about her lack of attendance, and when they followed this up with her parents, they told the school that Charlene stays over at other people's houses frequently, and they don't always know where she is. In April 2001, the report shows that Charlene and her sister disclosed to the services that their father Bob is drinking most nights and he returns from the pub with men. Charlene's sister makes allegations that one of these men tried to touch her and wanted to have a sexual relationship with her. In another part of the report, it reads that in November 2001, an environmental health officer visited the household and witnessed Charlene in a bedroom with an older man. The officer stated that the man was pulling up his trousers and zipping up his fly. Charlene was wearing a t-shirt and was counting out money. Shockingly, this incident was never investigated further, and the report states that this was due to the lack of cooperation from Bob Downes and the rest of the family. The final part of the report that I wanted to share with you was from the day that Charlene went missing, the 1st of November 2003. The report outlines that there was an incident between Charlene and a man staying in the Downes household at the time, Ray Monroe. Details of this incident are vague, and I've seen varying accounts online, but generally it is thought that Charlene wanted cigarettes from Ray, and they argued about this. Just 3 days later, Ray Monroe would be appearing in court to be sentenced for sexual offences against children under the age of 10. Ray had been staying at the Downes house due to being harassed in his own local area when people had found out that he was a convicted sex offender. Bob attended his friend's sentencing on the Monday. Karen and Bob have told the media that they were unaware that Ray Monroe was a convicted paedophile when they let him live in their house with their children. This brings us to the day that Charlene went missing, November the 1st, 2003. Although we now know that this was when she was last seen, Charlene was not actually reported missing until Monday the 3rd. Her mother, Karen, phoned the police to tell them that she had not been seen since 8 p.m. on the Saturday night. Once the call handler learned that Charlene was just 14 years old, she questioned why Karen had not reported this sooner. Karen tells the call handler that Charlene usually comes back, but this time she hasn't. The call handler tells Karen that she will send police to their address at 109 Buchanan Street, but Karen interrupts to say that she's got to go out shortly. The call handler tells Karen that her daughter is 14 and they need to speak to her, and she agrees to stay in. When police arrive at 109 Buchanan Street shortly after this call, they begin to question Karen about Charlene and what kinds of things she would do day to day to establish places she might have visited and people that she might have spoken to. They begin to establish a timeline of events that have led up to Charlene's disappearance. I will warn you that this timeline is quite complicated and has been pieced together from many different sources, some of which are unfortunately conflicting with each other. I've tried to take the most reliable pieces of information that I can find to form this. Charlene ate breakfast at 109 Buchanan Street on the morning of her disappearance. She then went out around 11 a.m. to a local Coral Island arcade, where she was seen with a woman who has not yet been identified. She then went to meet up with her sister, Rebecca, at the flat she was staying in with an older man called John McNally. The two got the bus into town and once again visited the arcade. There are several sightings of the two girls around this area until around 2:30 p.m. Charlene then parted ways with Rebecca to see a few friends at their houses. She joined back up with Rebecca after this, and they met up with another older man called Ronnie Fraser outside the Mecca Bingo Hall. He gave her £70. Around 4:30 p.m, she is seen down the alley behind the Funny Boys kebab shop. This alley housed the backs of many Asian-owned takeaways and was a popular spot for younger girls to hang out in. At 6:15 p.m, Charlene meets up with her mum Karen as she is handing out leaflets for work. Charlene goes to a phone box across the road and phones a friend and asks her to meet her. At 7 p.m, Karen says that Charlene's friends come to meet her, and she last sees them at 7:15 heading towards the Winter Gardens. 2 independent witnesses saw Charlene in the Carousel bar at around 8:45 p.m. A friend of Charlene's said that around 10:15 p.m. they went to the alley one more time, where Charlene gets given alcohol by some of the men from the takeaways. This same friend tells police that an Asian man in his 20s, who worked in one of the takeaways, asked Charlene to come to his flat the next day. The girls leave the alley and they go their separate ways. This was the last time that Charlene Downes was seen alive. Unfortunately, there were no further leads at this time that the police could follow up on. They had no idea where Charlene could be and who she might have been with. However, Charlene's disappearance sparked a significant amount of public interest, particularly surrounding the allegations of grooming of young girls by men in the local takeaways. A year after Charlene's disappearance, in 2004, a man named David Cassidy, who ran a slot machine business, came forward to tell police that he knew what had happened to Charlene. He claimed that a man named Tarek was the brother of the two men who had murdered her, and Tarek said that they had told him that they were responsible for the crime. The two men were kebab shop owners, Ayad Al-Batiki and Mohammed Raveshi. They owned a kebab shop called Funny Boys, just a 7-minute walk from Charlene's home. David told the police that Tarek said he had found Mohammed in bed with 3 young girls, one of which was allegedly Charlene Downes. Tarek went on to say that Charlene had threatened to go to the police, and as a result, Ayad Al-Batiki and Mohammed Raveshi had murdered her. The police took both men in for questioning, and whilst they were at the police station, they planted audio devices in Mohammed Raveshi's house and in his car to record his conversations, in the hopes that they'd be able to gather evidence that linked him to Charlene. These audio recording devices were left for a month, and when they were retrieved, a detective, Jan Besant, was given the task of transcribing what she heard. Detective Besant transcribed several pieces of audio that were considered to be vital to the police in this case. They included phrases such as, quote, "You look worried, you know. Believe you me, don't worry. There's nothing you know they can find." And, "I killed a girl, I killed a girl." The police arrested both of the men and charged them with the murder of Charlene Downes on the basis of these recordings and David Cassidy's statement as their main evidence. The two men went to trial in May of 2007, with Ayad Al-Batiki being charged with the murder of Charlene Downes, and Mohammed Raveshi being charged with disposing of her body. It was during this trial that the most infamous part of this case spread like wildfire through the media. It was suggested by the prosecution that the men had murdered Charlene and then put her body through the mincing machine in the kebab shop. They then further suggested that Charlene's remains were sold as kebab meat to cover up the crime and to get rid of the evidence. To this day, there has not been any proof that this actually happened, and it remains merely a suggestion by the prosecution. But, of course, this was sensationalised by the media and unfortunately still is to this day. The jury in this case debated the fate of the two men for 11 days. When they returned to the courtroom, they told the judge that they had failed to reach a verdict together, and a retrial was set to take place in 2008, a year later. However, this retrial never went ahead due to the defence claims that there were serious errors in the audio evidence that had been used in the initial trial. They claimed that due to the audio quality being so poor, the transcripts were inaccurate, meaning that key pieces of evidence used by the prosecution simply were not true. A forensic audiologist named Elizabeth McClelland says that the original transcripts from Detective Besant shouldn't have been used in the trial in the first place. She told the Mirror, quote, "This is a classic case of cognitive priming. The evidence presented by Jan Besant was potentially misleading. It's extremely important that when recordings are transcribed, that the person transcribing them has no prior awareness at all about that evidence. In this case, it shows several signs that she was subject to bias and influence by the events that she was investigating." Jan Besant was found guilty of police misconduct, but this decision was overturned. Jan sticks by her original transcript's accuracy. Another piece of key evidence for the defence came to light after a CD, previously marked as damaged by the prosecution, was given to the defence and they were able to play it. The CD contained an audio file that had been recorded by David Cassidy when he was wearing a wire. In the recording, he is trying to get Tarek to confirm that he was the one who spoke to David about who murdered Charlene. But in the recording, Tarek denies knowing anything about the initial conversation. A week after it was announced that a retrial would not be taking place for Charlene's murder, Charlene Downes stabbed Bob Downes during an argument. He did not sustain any serious injuries and decided not to press any charges. In 2009, Charlene's younger sister Emma had to complete community service after assaulting Tarek. In 2012, Charlene's younger brother Robert pleaded guilty in court to punching Mohammed Raveshi. He was given a fine and a suspended sentence. Charlene's case unfortunately went cold again for a number of years, but in 2014, the police launched an appeal through the TV show Crime Watch, offering £100,000 to anyone with information that leads to the prosecution of her killer. In 2019, a woman named Renee Crompton set up a Facebook group titled the Justice for Charlene Downes Campaign Group, which currently sits at around 3,000 members. Renee is very passionate about getting justice for Charlene. In 2022, Renee approached a private investigator service called Jarvie Can Investigations, who agreed to work pro bono on the case. Renee is hopeful that this is a positive step forward into finding out what truly happened to Charlene Downes. As we come to the end of the podcast, I wanted to take the moment to remember Charlene, the young girl at the centre of this whole story. Charlene had many friends who, despite the circumstances of her life, she got to enjoy some childhood moments with them, playing on the arcade machines and visiting the beach. She loved the band Westlife and was interested in fashion. If you or anyone you know has information on Charlene's disappearance, you can contact the police on 101, quoting log number 0663, or you can call independent charity Crime Stoppers on 0800 555 111. You can also submit information directly to the Major Incident Public Portal online, and I will leave a link to that in the show description. Thank you for listening to this podcast. If the platform you are listening on allows reviews, I'd be grateful to hear what you think, and I hope to see you in the next episode.